Morning, everyone. I'm very much.
She is a project manager for Wildlife SOS Kashmir. She has been managing the Wildlife SOS Human Wildlife Conflict Mitigation Project in Jammu and Kashmir since 2007. Apart from spreading awareness and education on wildlife conservation, actively involved in various scientific projects, especially on brown bears and Leviathan vipers. She will be sharing the conflict data from the last 20 years, injuries, fatalities, and various series about why there has been such an increase in conflict cases. Also sharing reasons for the conflict and lastly do's and don'ts, which will be useful avoiding such ugly incidents. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anshika ji. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for inviting me. And thank you for this elaborate introduction of myself. It's a privilege to be here with faculty members, students, and professionals who care deeply about animal health, public health, and the environment. Today, I'll be sharing insights from our work on human wildlife conflict in Kashmir and placing those observations within One Health framework, which reminds us that the health of humans, domestic animals, and wildlife and the environment are interconnected. And also that the real solutions require us to look at all of them together. So let me first begin with my presentation. Is this visible to all?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So today I'll try to show how human wildlife conflict is not only a conscious challenge, but also a public health and community well-being challenge. Kashmir's altitudinal and climatic variability supports one of the most diverse assemblages of wildlife in the region. Endemic species like hangul, along with rare and threatened species such as snow leopard, Himalayan brownie bear, musk deer, and several high altitude reptiles and birds, highlight the ecological value of this landscape. However, high biodiversity also increases the number of ecological interfaces where humans, livestock, and wildlife interact. And these interfaces are critical points for disease transmission, conflict events, and environmental stress. And addressing these risks requires coordinated actions across sectors, which reflects the foundational principle of One Health as interconnected ecosystems. Need interconnected solutions. Kashmir, very well known as the paradise on earth, but along with its beauty comes a growing challenge. Our region now sees some of the highest levels of human-wildlife interactions, particularly with Asiatic black bears. I can say primarily with Asiatic black bears. Because 87% of the conflict is just with this species, and then comes the common layer. and along with this, Malin brown bears and snakes. The fact is that human-wildlife interaction around the world is issue of great urgency globally, in fact. But when our environment is stressed, people, livestock, and wildlife are pushed closer together, and the risk increase for everyone. This makes it imperative to look deeper into both the ecological and social aspects of coexistence. In many parts of the Kashmir Valley, conflict happen because human settlements lie right next to wildlife habitats. In some areas, homes, orchards, and livestock sheds are almost inside the forest boundary. The geotag emits, from two conflict sites, one from Shahnagri, Bandipora, and the other from Nesbal Sumbal, helps illustrate this. I can show you these images closely. You can see this yellow tag is the conflict site, this is the forest, and this is the human settlement. Again, from the urban areas. This is the Sumbal area. This is the conflict site. This is the forest patch around this Manasbal Lake. And these are the human settlements. So it's exactly the kind of place where people, livestock, and wildlife overlap, which is where most conflicts begin. Now, when people and wildlife share the same space this closely, encounters are inevitable. These encounters take several forms. We see damage to agriculture and horticulture crops, loss of livestock and other domestic animals, and damage to crops and livestock. They directly impact rural livelihoods, and it definitely adds to the resentment against wildlife. Crop damage is probably one of the most widespread and persistent form of human-wildlife conflict, which results not only from animal feeding on the crops, but also from trampling, rooting, and breaking down the trees, and in destruction of commercial crops that may take several years to re-establish. So human-wildlife conflict reaches its most serious form when people are injured or killed. And when human life is affected, the response is often retaliation, which leads to the killing of the animal involved. But when we look little closer, we realize that human-wildlife conflict is actually a form of collateral damage. Both sides are paying the price. I mean, on one hand, we lose precious human lives, but on the other hand, wild animals are being killed, displaced, or left orphaned in retaliation. And it's easy to focus only on impact on people. But many of these conflicts, if you ponder upon, these are actually driven by pressures we place on wildlife and their habitats. For example, let's understand this. For example, when our livestock numbers exceed the carrying capacity of an area, they outcompete wild ungulates for forage. And these wild ungulates are the prey base for the wild carnivores. And as natural prey declines, large carnivores may turn to livestock, which in turn increases conflict. But more serious than this is when Uh, Livestock and free-ranging dogs or ferals become the source of transmission of viral and zoonotic disease to wildlife. These pathogens can move rapidly through wild populations. And unlike domestic animals, wildlife cannot be vaccinated or treated. We saw a clear example of this in Dear Wildlife Sanctuary in September 2018 when 23 Asiatic lions died in just 2 weeks following a CDV spillover, which was linked to unvaccinated village dogs. So events like this shows how disease transmission across species can have catastrophic consequences for endangered wildlife. And the cost of this conflict is not just the visible injury or loss, it also includes hidden, long lasting ecological impacts that weaken wildlife populations, and it definitely destabilize the entire ecosystem. So, with all these pressures building on both sides, the question is how has this conflict actually unfolded on the ground over time? And to understand this, we have to look at the long term data. And when we map the numbers, the scale of the challenge becomes very clear. This slide shows the number of bear attacks recorded in Kashmir Valley from 2000 to 2020. What you see, from the graph here is a very sharp rise from the early 2000s, with the numbers peaking around the period when land use change, human expansion, and habitat fragmentation intensified. So these data points reflect exactly what we discussed in the previous slide. Close proximity between settlements and forests, competition between livestock and wild prey, and increased movement of people into the wildlife areas. And all of these factors, they push these animals into contact with communities. And the consequence is a spike in conflict cases. So this trend is important because it shows how environmental pressures So it shows how environmental pressures translate directly into human injuries, wildlife deaths, and broader ecological stress. These conflict numbers are not random. They track the stress on the landscape. And this data figures out two more things. First, black bears don't attack to kill, but they attack in fear and retaliation. And this is completely evident because deaths are just 5% of the total injuries or total attacks. Second, the number of reported incidents and deaths started diminishing in 2016, and by 2020, you can see the number of attacks was down with 49 with 4 deaths. And this became possible by applying a multidisciplinary approach like capacity building, inclusion of modern and efficient tools and equipments, creation of more control rooms, and rapid response teams, and surely by education and awareness of masses. This slide shows the age profile of victims involved in bear attacks. Out of the cases where age was documented, we found that nearly half, almost 47%, were between 31 and 50 years old. And this isn't surprising because people in this age group, they are the ones, who are most active outdoors. They are farming, they are collecting firewood, grazing livestock. They are the people who, work in the orchards or traveling between forest edge villages. You know, so these are exactly the interface edges which we discussed in earlier slides. These are the places where people and wildlife overlap most. And this pattern reinforces how closely conflict is tied to livelihood practices and land use patterns. Now, this slide shows that the highest number of attacks occur between 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And it further strengthens the fact that the people who work in fields and orchards are more vulnerable to the attack from bears, who come to these orchards and agricultural fields for food. Now, let's look at the second major species involved in the conflict in the valley. That's leopards. Their conflict pattern is quite different from that of bears. Though the time period and other variables are same for both the conflicts. But leopard conflict is much rarer than Asiatic black bear conflicts. Between 2006 and 2020, the Kashmir Valley reported 371 leopard attacks. And out of these, 75% resulted in and 24% resulted in death. This proportion is much higher compared to bear attacks. And this difference, it reflects the nature of the animal completely. You can see leopards are ambush predators. They are fast, powerful, and highly reactive. So, the probability of serious injury or death is higher when an encounter with the leopard occurs. This figure asserts that the leopard attacks are both accidental and predatorial. And many of these incidents happen near human settlement, that sit very close to forest, or in areas where livestock grazing overlaps with wildlife territories. Again, the pattern ties back to the habitat pressure, land use change, and the increasing overlap between people, livestock, and wildlife. Now, when we look at the age profile of leopard victims, we see that the highest number of victims fall between 30 to 49 years of age, which again reflects exposure related to outdoor work like farming, grazing animals, and moving through forest edge areas and stuff like that. So this helps us to understand that maximum of the leopard attacks are defensive or accidental and not predatorial. But what is especially concerning is the death rate in children aged 0 to 9 years, which is almost 65% of all leopard-related deaths. This happens because children are smaller, more vulnerable, and sometimes outdoors without supervision. Especially, we have seen this in forest fringe villages. So, this slide is a reminder that conflict is not just an ecological issue, it is also a major public safety issue, especially for young children. Hence, interaction with community is key. The need for public awareness on how to stay safe in leopard country, it is imperative. From the slide, you can see that the peak time for leopard attack is between 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. in the morning. So again, this closely matches with the period when people are most active outdoors and when livestock is being taken out for grazing. Leopards, they tend to stay concealed during early morning hours. As people start moving around fields, orchards, and villages, forest fringes, the chances of sudden encounters with this species increases. Because this timing pattern, it shows us how small adjustments like supervised grazing, avoiding dense shrub areas with peak covers, or using group movements, which we always preach them that you should move in groups while going for the grazing and any other errand in the forest. So that will definitely help us to reduce these conflict risk. And all of these fall under very simple but effective behavior modification strategies. Beyond the wildlife and ecological side, the impact on human health system is also significant. SKIMS hospital data gives us a clear picture of this burden. SKIMS data over the last 2 decades shows us that 10 to 15% of beds in the plastic surgery ward are occupied by human wildlife conflict victims, and that too at any given time in the year. This is a huge number for a single cause. It reflects not only the frequency of attacks, but also the severity of injuries, which includes deep lacerations, facial wound fractures, multiple surgeries, and long recovery times. These are the cases that need specialized care. And we have personally seen, these victims in the hospitals. Wildlife conflict is not just a wildlife department issue. It directly impacts public health infrastructure, mental health of victims, and the economic, stability of families. So the medical side of conflict, that often remains invisible, but we can say that it's an essential, part of the overall picture of this human wildlife conflict. Now, to understand how we reach this point, we need to look at what is driving these conflicts on the ground. Several ecological and anthropogenic pressures and factors are pushing wildlife into closer contact with people. And these include encroachment into protected areas and wild areas, fragmentation and degradation of wildlife habitats. When forest cover breaks into smaller patches, animals are forced to move through human settlements to find food, water, or shelter. And over time, these movements, they become predictable pathways for these animals, thus increasing the chances of the encounters. After fragmentation, disturbances inside the forest areas is the another driving force for this human-wildlife conflict. And declining natural prey base, which we already touched base upon in previous slide, that's one of the biggest driving forces for human-wildlife conflict. In these pictures, you can see this is the real scenario of the conflicting habitats. These are the scattered houses. This is the forest. See. From this picture, you can very well see Okay. Then there are other several, factors that are the typical driving forces for these human wildlife conflicts, and that accelerate these conflicts even further. One of the biggest shifts in the Kashmir Valley has been the change from paddy fields to orchards. Definitely for some, economic gains and upliftments. Just a second. So yeah, I mean, these orchards, they attract wild animals because a lot of food availability, and which is very rich, and that also gives not only the food availability but the cover provided by these dense vegetation. And there is also a rapid shift in the overall land use, land cover pattern. More human activity, more infrastructure, and more fragmented habitat all contribute to increased movement of wildlife towards these settlements. Every land use change, that has a ripple effect. When agriculture or orchards replace natural habitat, wildlife has fewer options, and eventually, these overlaps with human spaces. Several other human-driven patterns that intensify the conflict is, one of the worst of them is the food dumps left by humans, which act as attractants for bears and other wildlife. And believe me, this has proven, catastrophic for the management of our brown bear population in Sonmarg and Gurez, where these bears have become so much food habituated and food conditioned by scavenging on the waste and the garbage at some places. And they have become so food conditioned that they have almost lost their natural behavior. Their cubs, they have got imprinted by scavenging from these garbage dumps. And this in future is going to be catastrophic for this whole population balance in these two places. Increase in domestic livestock, again, it's one of the driving forces for for increase in this human wildlife conflict, because they directly compete with wild herbivores and attract carnivores towards the human settlements and the human habitation. In urban areas also we have seen an increase in the ferals, again, which act as attractant for the leopards. Lack of awareness in masses lead to risky behaviors near forest areas. Though we have been living with these wildlife and these wild, village edges from past so many years, but we know very little about the behavior of these animals. Climatic factors, again, is another driving force which influence food availability and animal movement during the times when they should have been in hibernation, or they should have been in an inactivation period. So each of these adds another layer of risk. For example, when garbage is dumped near forest edge, animals quickly learn to rely on it. And believe me, this I have seen personally in so many areas. So this habituation brings them closer to people and increases conflict. And I have several stories, several case studies to share on this. But unfortunately, we have time limits. But definitely, if another session happens, we will deliberate on some case studies. After understanding the drivers of the conflict, the next question is, what can we actually do to reduce these incidents on the ground? These are the three broad strategies used globally in and in Kashmir as well. The first is modifying human behavior. This we can do through regular awareness, preaching people about the better agriculture and husbandry practices. We can teach them the proper waste management, and we can also give them more information about the various compensation schemes, because these help reduce attractants and the risky behavior during these conflicts. The second is modifying wildlife behavior. This can be done through some negative reinforcement, like which includes creating some barriers, guarding crops and livestock, and in some cases removing the problem animals from a high conflict area. The third is preventive spatial separation, such as creating buffer zones that keep settlements and wildlife habitats apart. Though at a larger scale, this seems really impossible, because there have been the land cover transformation that are irreversible. But yes, at the micro habitat level, we can make some is education and awareness. Underestimate awareness, it builds trust. Awareness builds trust. It narrows the gap between the masses. It narrows the gap between the and both human and animal lives, they are protected. And awareness is most effective when it is targeted. Not everyone needs the same kind of information or the same approach. When we plan our awareness programs, we consider factors like location, literacy, livelihood, age, and vulnerability. Locals and villagers, they are the most important groups, because they interact with wildlife daily at their orchards, at their working places. Prominent figures, public representatives, village heads, administration, media, and religious leaders, they shape public opinion, and hence can amplify messages quickly. Youth are critical because they are the future stewards of our environment, and often the most receptive to new ideas. Women need more education on proper waste disposal and safety of their kids. So each group needs a different kind of engagement to make the message truly effective. This slide usually reinforces the three main target groups.
The
The
idea
idea
is to reach
is to reach
people at multiple levels.
household,
Community
leadership,
and
and
youth.
youth.
When
When
these
these
groups,
groups
understand their role, the
the
overall
overall
impact
impact
is much stronger.
stronger.
Definitely,
I mean,
youth
youth
deserve
deserve
a special focus because our goal is to build a culture where young people feel connected to wildlife conservation. For this,
For this,
activities like school programs, college lectures, nature walks, camps, debates, and competitions help them form emotional and intellectual connections with nature. And when youth understand the value of biodiversity, they become best advocates in their own families. And definitely they play a role in communities as well. And this creates a ripple effect, that helps to shape our future generations. Outdoor activities like nature walks and camps, they help students reconnect with nature in a direct way. These experiences, they build empathy and curiosity among them. Once a child sees a wild animal or understands a habitat firsthand, or experience the nature in their with their own hands, their attitude definitely changes. They become more aware, more responsible, and more likely to promote coexistence. This slide highlights the range of activities we conduct, both indoors and outdoors. Indoor sessions, they help us to build foundational knowledge with the very basic. Whenever we do any indoor programs, we start with the basic. The basic, like the kind of wildlife, the species of wildlife we have in our own state. And this helps us to build their foundational knowledge. While outdoor experiences that help us to build real connection and understanding in them. The combination of both is what makes the outreach effective. Finally, it's important to see awareness not as a quick fix, but as a long-term investment. And for this, we have to have perseverance and what we can say that some sort of willingness to make the lasting change, because it takes time. It's not a deliberate that will happen in just a day. So education and awareness doesn't give the instant results. But over time, they transform the attitudes and behaviors. They build a sense of responsibility towards nature. And we really believe that slowly but surely we witness this change. Though awareness is crucial, but we also need to have some practical measures on the ground. The professional capacity building, that has been crucial in ensuring effective conflict mitigation. More wildlife control rooms were set up at central points to receive distress calls, coordinate rescue operations, and provide immediate assistance. Rapid response teams with some modern and specialized equipment created to handle emergencies more efficiently. And lastly, scientific research has been instrumental in developing better understanding and developing new approaches for effective mitigation and management strategies. And lastly, human
Human
wildlife
wildlife
conflict
conflict
is
is
not just a
not just a
conservation issue.
conservation issue.
It
It
affects
affects
human
human
health,
health,
animal
animal
well-being,
well-being,
and
and
ecosystem
ecosystem
stability.
stability.
And
And
only a
only
One
a
Health
One Health
approach
approach
can give
can give
us a
us a
long-lasting
long-lasting
solution to
solution to
this.
this.
Thank you so
Thank
very
you so
much.
very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us today and giving your valuable knowledge. Does anyone from the audience have any questions regarding this topic, or if you want to ask anything about the human wildlife conflict, please put your questions forward. Thank you.
You've seen animals because of these conflicts. What's the status of these cases now? Have they decreased? Okay, status I have already shared with you. I have shown the decrease in these conflicts. Uh, I won't say that there is decrease in the conflict. I would rather say that there is increase in the conflicts, because definitely of all the developmental activities, landscape changes, and all other factors that I discussed. Among that, waste disposal have been one of the greatest factors for both black bear and leopard conflicts. So yeah, I would say that conflicts have increased, but at the same time, I would say that communication has been better, and we have been able to put trust in masses, that yes, there are people who can help to mitigate these conflicts. Secondly, uh, we can say that through multidisciplinary approaches, these conflicts, I mean, the deaths and the injuries, the impact of these conflicts have decreased very efficiently.
Thank you, Kasma. Does anyone have any other question?
Have you seen the animals being put down or killed because of them? Because of what? Because of retaliation? It was seen earlier, but nowadays, because of the rapid response teams and all the approaches that we are applying on the ground, the situation has turned around. Now it's the other way around. I mean, now, because of the efficiency from the department, from the various agencies, we have been able to uh, make people understand that taking situation in their own hands is not the solution. So yeah, now people have been very, very helpful. They now don't take the situations in their own hands, rather they call uh, the agencies, they call the wildlife department, they call wildlife SOS for help. I have given my personal numbers in the uh, rescue helplines. My both the numbers have been given for the rescue helplines, and every day I address the calls that we receive. um you know Now we can say that even the sighting of the animal is reported. I genuinely say this because I have been receiving the calls from people, even from the learned people who know the wildlife and their behavior. They call and they say, "Ma'am, I was traveling through this road and I have seen the bear." And I encourage them. I say, "Yeah, that's the nice sight. They are in their own place, they are in their own habitat, so this is very good." So yeah, now the killing in retaliation, that has decreased, definitely.
Thank you so much, Kansma, and thank you, ma'am, for answering the questions. I want to put one question forward that with the help of technology and advancements today, so how can we prevent this human wildlife conflict in any region, not only Kashmir, in any region?
I think I have already answered this question in our slides. Uh, that yes, definitely technology helps. uh, we have been able to put down the numbers of uh, serious injuries or deaths through the uh, use of most efficient and modern equipments and things. And definitely these equipments, they help in better handling of these conflict situations. And along with this, the scientific tools, like nowadays, we have the microchips, we have the radio collars. They have been proven more efficient in building a database for the species who are like uh, whose database is very scant in the field. Like about if we talk about our own species, the brown bears, we are taking the help of the radio callers in knowing about more about their behavior, the landscape they use, the movement pattern they do, the seasonal movements they do, their hibernation period, their area of foraging, their area of denning. So lot of this, we are getting a lot of this data we are having because of these scientific tools. And this Himalayan brown bear, which is so elusive that very less is known about this species. Even if you go through any site or any Google or any other thing, you won't get any kind of information about the Himalayan brown bears. So there were certain questions, like we are working for the brown bears in um, Sonmarg and Gurez. As I mentioned, that there is an issue with this population in both the places, and we are trying to intervene and know more about what can be done to safeguard this population, because these are very less in number in our place. So we need to have some conservation policies for them. But for that, before applying any conservation policy, we should have the database about them, which was not available anywhere. We were not knowing whether these brown bears, where they come from, what do they eat in nature, why they are scavenging on this human waste and garbage, why they are descending. I remember uh, just 7 to 10 years back, we used to go to Dras to have a glimpse of a brown bear, and that too when we used to stay there for a night or two or three, and then only we could have been able to have a sight of this elusive species. But nowadays, if you want to see the brown bear, just go to the Sonmarg or Gurez, and in the evening you will have one. So this was the issue to to delve upon why these species are descending in the range. I mean, now brown bears can be seen at 2,500 meters of elevation, whereas their actual habitat is much beyond the 3,500 elevations. So this was the issue to ponder upon, why this is happening. And since we had no information about this species, we did the survey of the area for one long year through camera traps and uh, walking through the terrains and all those things, and also by collecting the bear scats, analyzing them, and also through questionnaire and other um, uh, you know works. So yeah, I mean, this was 1 year that took us to know just a bit about these species. Later, when we did the camera this radio calling, we were able to get answer to lot of our questions, and now we are in the position that we can help in implementing some managemental practices as well as the managemental implications for the conservation of this species in both the areas.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Just one last question I want to ask you, that if you want to do internship in wildlife SOS project, then how we can proceed as an individual or as a team?
You can proceed both the ways. It completely depends on your abilities, capabilities, the time you want to dedicate to this cause. Uh, so yeah, you can go through our website. We have a section there, volunteer with us. You can just fill the form there and give the data there. And volunteership is not only available in Kashmir, it's available for wildlife SOS at all its centers. So if you are not in Jammu and Kashmir, you can try volunteer with other centers of wildlife SOS as well. So for that, you have to visit our website www.wildlifesos.org.
Thank you so much, ma'am. On the behalf of our One Health Cost team, I express a heartfelt gratitude for our esteemed speaker for our valuable knowledge and perspective. And I also thank all the participants for their active involvement, which made this webinar meaningful. And a special appreciation to our organizing committee and technical support for the seamless coordination and throughout the session. With this, we conclude our webinar. Thank you so much. Warm regards.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was so nice to interact with such learned community. Thank you so much.